The United States and China are the two most powerful competitors in the race to win the 21st century. But if a direct conflict were to erupt, which side would be militarily superior? That's what we're going to talk in today's video. If China decides to launch an attack on the island of Taiwan, the United States might be powerless to prevent it. By the time the People's Liberation Army fires its third volley of missiles at the island, which Beijing regards as a breakaway region, the United States may only have learned of the attacks a few hours earlier. Beijing's rocket force can cripple Taiwan's military, infrastructure, and ports in a matter of minutes. However, if China had intended to conquer Taiwan, the result might have been different, perhaps something entirely different. For that to happen, China would also have to launch an amphibious assault, first deploying troops along the beaches and then marching towards Taipei's capital. It is a massive military challenge for China to capture and hold its island neighbor, despite having a larger army of 1.9 million soldiers compared to Taiwan's 150,000. On June 3, Taiwanese Foreign Minister Joseph Wu stated that Taipei does not expect a conflict to erupt anytime soon, but they are trying their best to get themselves ready. He also added that if a war breaks out between China and Taiwan, they will fight it themselves. It will be greatly appreciated if other nations come to their aid, but they will fight the war for their survival and future. The US, along with its allies, can respond by managing airlifts to Taiwan in this scenario. In a crisis, the US could further attack the shipping fleet of China in the Indian Ocean with submarines and then even stealth aircraft, weakening its economic lifelines. The disparity between the two Taiwan scenarios, a Chinese military attack or an invasion, reveals a lot about the US and China's relative military power, which is a barometer of the two superpowers' strength. President of US Joe Biden told in a joint session of Congress in April, where he assured President Xi that the US will form a powerful military presence in the Indo-Pacific just as it does with NATO in Europe, not to initiate conflict but to prevent it. Xi Jinping told the People's Liberation Army a month before that they should continue to use combat to guide their work, to step up war preparations. China's military spending is now the second highest in the world, trailing only the United States, and it is continuing to rise. As per the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, its military budget exceeds that of India, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan combined. This year, China's defense budget reached around $324 billion, although it has been increasing at a rate of 6 to 8% per year for the past 5 years. Defense Intelligence Agency James estimates that US spending is still far ahead at $759 billion. In 2020, China will have 55 small warships, almost double the number it had 5 years prior. Currently, there are 6 amphibious vessels in service, 3 of which were launched in 2015, and a third aircraft carrier, which will be significantly larger than its forebears, will be completed soon. Beijing, according to Maya Nowens of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, is determined to gain dominance in the waters surrounding the country. China is also working to develop the capabilities required to support military activities, implying that they could attack over great distances. China's focus on its region would give it a local advantage in any conflict with the US. China devotes all of its resources to planning as well as preparing for a contingency in East Asia, while the United States has added responsibilities in Europe, Middle East, and worldwide. If a conflict breaks out in East Asia, then the Chinese military is pretty close to par with US military. The military buildup in China is making an impact. A decade ago, the professor of National University of Australia, Sir Stephen Freeling, mentioned that the United States would have dominated the Chinese military. He believes that the United States now recognize that it may lose the conflict with China, at least on a conventional level. The location of the focus is critical. According to Janes, the US Air Force currently operates nearly 2,300 warplanes, while the US Navy as well as the Marines operate around 1,422 aircrafts. However, the United States cannot send all of its planes to China's coast, certainly not in the 6 to 8 minutes it might take a DF-11A rocket to cross the 130-kilometer Taiwan Strait to its intended target. Meanwhile, China's 1,264 warplanes are based there. With troops, it's a similar story. The 1.38 million active military personnel in the United States are better equipped and trained than most of their 1.9 million Chinese counterparts. But getting them in place and on time to take on China would be a major challenge. Some aspects aren't easily quantifiable. The very last time Chinese troops were directly involved in combat was in 1979, when China launched an expensive month-long battle against Vietnam in retaliation for Hanoi's action in Southeast Asia. The US military has accumulated decades of on-the-ground experience, most recently in Afghanistan and Iraq and the Middle East. These were not only expensive, but they also provided valuable combat experience. China is well aware of the disparity. After decades of relative peace, its army is now sending troops to Africa for peace operations, giving them first-hand experience in conflict zones. The military is also structured differently. Beijing's arsenal includes a lot of rockets. In 2015, the People's Liberation Army created a separate branch for the 100,000-strong rocket force. A US congressional report concluded that the PLS missile forces are essential to China's attempts to prevent and counter third-party interference in a regional conflict. The US believes China possesses approximately 2,000 mid-range missiles, which could be used to ward off the US Navy during a conflict. China's nuclear arsenal is estimated to be between 200 and 350 weapons, less than 5% of the United States arsenal, but potentially enough just to cause a wider conflict through the threat of mutual destruction. If a war breaks out in the South China Sea, the United States would be under stress to rapidly neutralize the roughly 10 man-made islands China has built to serve as military bases. A powerful Chinese fleet would pose a threat to the US in the region. The location of China's new fleet of attack submarines, according to Booking Institution, could serve as a barrier to US military escalation. Assaulting submarines in port to refuel and rearm is the only effective way of countering the threat. But that would definitely necessitate strikes on China's mainland, with all the ensuing enormous risk of escalation. One possibility for attacking the man-made islands is to send teams of US Marine Radar commandos to destroy weapons and security systems. However, precision bombing necessitates military access to space, in which orbiting satellites aid in the guidance of munitions. Beidou, China's version of GPS, went live in July 2020, allowing the country to track ships, planes, cars, and also smartphones from space without depending on US technology, which has controlled global positioning for years. In the event of a conflict, both sides would go to the space first to strike the other's forces, said Tate Narkin of the intelligence group in the United States. China or the US could do this by feeding false information to satellites from the ground, a technique known as spoofing, to prevent space-based weapon location pinpointing. China would seek to remove the eyes and ears of the United States and its allies to render them blind on the battlefield. According to Lowy, the US has launched 615 satellites into space over the last 3 years, compared to 168 for China. While the United States continues to lead in space for the time being, it is not clear how long this dominance will last. In the war scenario, the US wants to keep the status quo in the region, whereas China wants to completely change it. China is primarily attempting to gain territorial control, making East Asia a likely source of conflict. Thus, the problem of US-China military superiority is relegated to the all-important realm of politics. What would the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, and Australia do if a war broke out? All of these countries were Cold War allies of the United States, but they haven't had to worry about the conflict in the region since the 1970s. The murky calculus of how much pain, risk, and loss both sides can undergo are likely to determine victory and failure between the United States and China. Who do you think has the superiority in winning the war? Let us know down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, do leave this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notification to see more of our future videos. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next video.